Hey guys, tonight we begin with the end of the world. Or at least it feels like the end, because you're born into a place where the wind always smells like salt politics and someone else's ambition. Halicarnassus, a name you probably can't spell unless you've recently been tested on obscure trivia curls along the coast of what we now call Turkey. But back then it's a Greek city under Persian control, which means it's basically a polite identity crisis with good architecture. You grow up hearing two languages, eating three cuisines, and learning very early that choosing sides too quickly gets you into the kind of trouble that leaves people mysteriously falling into harbors. Your mother is probably noble, your father definitely ambitious, and your nursemaids whisper that the stars look different over royal blood. Or maybe that's just what they tell all bossy little girls who don't want to sit still. The sea is your lullaby. You hear waves before you hear politics, but both will shape your life more than you can guess. And every day you grow more curious. Why do the merchant ships always leave just before dawn? Why does that one man bow lower than the rest? Why does no one ever tell you why your mother cries after court dinners? You don't understand it yet, but you're not meant to stay quiet. Not forever. Still, this is the ancient world, and you're not supposed to matter. You're not a warrior. You're not a king. You're not even a son. You're a girl. One of many. And if history had its way, you'd be married off by 15, wrapped in fabric and renamed by someone with better sandals. But you don't disappear into a marriage. Not you. You stay, you watch, you listen, and you learn because power like the tide always comes back for those who wait in the right harbor. Historians still argue whether your childhood was royal or merely well-connected, but they all agree on one thing. By the time the world notices you, you've already been watching it for years. You come of age in a city built on contradiction. Greek temples rise beside Persian banners. The market hums in Dorian dialect while soldiers drill in Persian formation. Everyone wears compromise like a tunic, and you learn to do the same, except yours has sharper hems and better embroidery. At some point, quietly, without fanfare, you start giving advice. First to your brother, then to your uncle. Then to the men who thought they were too important to need a girl's opinion. But your ideas work. Your instincts are sharp. Your voice is steady. And slowly the world tilts. You get older. People notice. Some sneer, some whisper, some pretend not to see. And still you learn. Naval patterns, tribute logistics, who smiles too much, who forgets to blink. Then, as often happens in ancient politics, the men around you begin to not last. A skirmish here, a fever there, a poorly timed duel with a spear that wasn't sharpened quite right. Whether by fate, illness, or the slow unraveling of ambition, you find yourself at the edge of something vast and unexpected power. No one crowns you. Not officially. No golden diadem, no thunderclap. Just a quiet, practical reshuffling. Your husband is gone. Your son is too young. And so you become regent of Halicarnassus. Congratulations. You're now ruling a naval city under the watchful eye of the Persian Empire, with a toddler in one arm and a fleet of warships under the other. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fun to imagine this sleepy little time machine stretching across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Because here you are, a woman on the throne wrapped in silk, standing on stone, watching the harbor glow gold in the morning light. The ships are quiet for now, but not for long. And neither are you. You don't throw a feast. You don't issue proclamations. You don't even sit on the fancy side of the throne room. You just govern. Quietly, competently, dangerously. The whispers start immediately. They always do. That you're too young, too female, too polite. That you're just keeping the seat warm until your son grows up and puts on his father's armor. That you probably ask your advisors before making decisions because surely you couldn't be doing this alone. But you are. You appoint the right men. You remove the wrong ones. You balance Persian loyalty with Greek sensibility. You tax just enough to fill the treasury, but not so much that people start practicing rebellion after dinner. You walk the line so finely that even the gods probably squint at you from Olympus and mutter something about good luck keeping that up. And you do. Because here's the thing, you never asked for this power, but you wear it like you were born in it. You don't need to shout because when you speak, people listen. And when they don't, well, they learn to. You walk the harbor walls at dusk inspecting ships, counting sails, memorizing faces. You're not supposed to know how to judge a crew by how they coil their ropes, or how to tell when a captain's hiding something just by how fast he steps off the gangplank. But you've learned, and now you use it. Historians still argue whether you ruled Halicarnassus alone or through a council of male regents. But the evidence, like the smirk on your face when a rival governor stumbles over his titles, suggests you weren't much for sharing. You start receiving envoys from Persian satraps, from Ionian cities, from island rulers who pretend to be polite but look at you with the same tight-lipped curiosity people usually reserve for trained parrots and talking statues. Some are respectful, most are not. One in particular, a blustering noble from a neighboring port, tells you he admires your courage and offers his protection. You smile sweetly and offer him wine. And by morning, he's on a ship back home, reassessing his understanding of diplomacy, women, and possibly fermented grapes. You let the story circulate, and then quietly you build ships, walls, networks. You make alliances where needed and remain aloof where it's smarter. You stay close to Persia not out of love but logic. They own the sea. You merely rent a coastline. You attend Persian court now and then. You dress in embroidered linen and carry yourself with the grace of someone who knows exactly how many eyes are on her and how few of them actually see. You bow to the great king when required. Speak softly. Never overstep. And still, you're dangerous. Because unlike most of the governors and advisors in stuffed robes around you, you are not angling for more land, or a title or a marble statue with flattering cheekbones. You're playing a longer game. You begin writing letters in your head before you ever put ink to parchment. You draft policies while braiding your son's hair. You plan naval maneuvers while smiling at parties. You learn to wield silence like a sword. And slowly the city changes with you. Merchants grow richer. Nobles quieter. Soldiers sharper. The docks run on time, the taxes are predictable. The oracles go suspiciously quiet about your rule, which is as close to approval as any woman can hope for in an age like this. But not everyone is happy. There are rivals always. Other coastal rulers. Jealous men. Old bloodlines with fading influence. They mutter, they plot, they send spies. One is caught, of course. Young, nervous, hopelessly amateur. You summon him and instead of punishment, you give him a job. He accepts. And within a year, he's one of your most loyal informants. Because you don't rule with fear. You rule with leverage. The idea of you, this widow queen with a handful of ships and a stare like polished obsidian, starts to spread. Not just through Caria, but through the Aegean. They start calling you clever, then dangerous, then cunning. Eventually just queen. You let them. And all the while your son grows. He watches you carefully. Not the way boys usually watch their mothers, but the way future rulers study the winds. You love him fiercely, but you don't coddle him. He learns by watching, and there is much to see. Because ruling in your world is not about speeches or parades. It's about balance. Pressure. Knowing when to let things simmer and when to pull the pot off the fire. And when Persia calls when a shadow looms across the Ionian coast in the shape of a coming war, you don't flinch, you don't hesitate. You gather your advisors, you open your maps, and you say something no one expects. We sail, not because you want to, not because you seek glory, but because you know a storm when you smell one. And this one has Xerxes written all over it. You don't pack lightly. When you prepare to join a war led by the most powerful empire on earth, you bring more than weapons. You bring a reputation, a name that's already rippled across the Aegean, a city that's running so smoothly people have started telling jokes about it. And yes, you bring ships, 5 of them. That's it, not 20, not 50, just 5. But they're fast, sharp, elegant, crewed by sailors who can tie knots in a storm and still remember to salute. Ships that smell like salt and cedar with hulls that whisper through the water like conspirators. You don't have the largest fleet, not even close. But you have something better, you know how to use it. Xerxes, meanwhile, is assembling a force so massive it's already become legend before it even finishes packing. Whole rivers are bridged, mountains are drilled through, thousands of ships, tens of thousands of soldiers' campfires that stretch from shore to horizon. He's not invading Greece, he's smothering it. And you, you show up with 5 ships and a steel-spined posture that says, "Yes, I'm meant to be here?" No, I'm not impressed. Historians still debate why Xerxes accepted your offer. Some say he admired your intellect. Others suggest your fleet filled a strategic coastal gap. But most agree he wasn't used to women speaking plainly, let alone commanding warships with calm precision. You arrive in Sardis, the staging point of his invasion, dressed in layered robes of teal and saffron gold embroidery catching the sun. You're polite, poised, and immediately out of place. You don't laugh too loudly. You don't drink too much. You don't correct people when they mispronounce your name. But you do notice everything. The arrogance, the logistics, the endless carts of dried dates and barley. The general whose maps are upside down. The admiral who still doesn't understand tides. The whispers that follow you from tent to tent, as if your presence is a puzzle that someone forgot to solve. You let it all pass, because you're not here to argue. You're here to sail. Xerxes holds court like a god on tour. Drapes. Incense. Enough gold to break several wagons. He's taller than you expected. Louder, too. And surrounded by men who never say no. You wait until he's finished boasting about the bridges he's built over the Hellespont, the canal he's carved through Athos, the army that can blot out the sun with arrows. You smile. Then you offer him your fleet. Just 5 ships, but led by you. He raises an eyebrow. Someone behind him snorts. You don't flinch. You tell him what you've told yourself every morning since your husband died. There's more than one way to lead. And Xerxes, whether out of curiosity calculation or sheer imperial whim, says yes. You are now officially an admiral in the Persian navy. Cue the raised eyebrows, the awkward silences, the veiled sarcasm served with dinner wine. But no one stops you, because you don't give them a reason to. You dress the part, speak the language. Bow when it's expected, command when it isn't. And when your fleet sails north from Caria to join the larger Persian force, the sea feels like it's holding its breath. You sail past islands that have already surrendered, past cities debating whether to resist or throw open their gates, past coastlines that once looked at you as a curiosity and now start to whisper another word. Threat. You train your sailors harder. Drill faster. Practice boarding maneuvers in the early dawn before the water has decided what kind of day it's going to be. You rewrite battle protocols on the back of old merchant manifests. You assign roles not by rank, but by instinct. And most importantly, you listen to the wind, to your crew, to the subtle shifts in Xerxes' campaign. Because while he dreams of spectacle thrones on hills, oceans whipped with chains punishments for rivers, war doesn't care about theater. War favors the quiet ones, the watchers, the people who spend more time planning than shouting. As the Persian fleet grows, stretches, spreads like ink across the Aegean, you know you're one drop in a vast tide. But you also know tides turn, and that 5 well-commanded ships can cut deeper than 50 if steered at the right moment. So you keep sailing toward the storm, toward history, toward a war you didn't start, but one you absolutely plan to survive. You are surrounded by men who don't know what to do with you. They've seen female priests, they've heard of warrior queens in distant lands. But none of them have ever sat in a war council while a woman in a sea blue cloak points at a naval map and says, "If we fight here, we'll lose." Which is exactly what you do. The council tent is heavy with heat and the scent of overcooked barley. Sand clings to the rugs. Gold rings glint on half-listening fingers. And every man in that tent, every noble general, admiral, and cousin of someone vaguely important, pretends they're not skeptical. But you feel it. Like wind changing direction, like a current just below the surface. You speak anyway. Your voice is measured, clear. You lay out the case, the terrain, the tides, the bottleneck in the strait, the speed of the Greek triremes. You suggest alternatives. You mention supply lines morale, how badly some of these ships handle in a tight turn. And still no one interrupts you. Not because they respect you, but because they're too stunned to realize they've just been out-strategized by someone wearing earrings. Historians still argue whether your military acumen was instinct experience or sheer necessity. Some even claim you were coached by Persian advisors. But anyone listening to you now knows better. You aren't repeating someone else's idea. You are the idea. Still, they ignore you. Xerxes listens, nods, then does the opposite. Because that's what men like him do. They collect advice like trinkets, but only wear the ones that glitter loudest. One particularly pompous admiral calls your warning charming. He says it with a smile that would curdle milk. You thank him. Then make a mental note of how many ships he's likely to sink. You leave the council and walk along the camp's edge where the sea hums just out of reach. You let the cool wind wrap around your shoulders. The stars are out. They don't blink. They never do. You stare at them a long time, then whisper something under your breath. A prayer, a curse, a promise. Even you aren't sure. The next morning, the fleet sets sail. Your 5 ships stay close to the center, not out of fear, but because you know the safest place in a poorly led invasion is just slightly behind the loudest fool. And still the men talk. You hear it at night when the fires crackle low. A woman shouldn't command. She'll break when the fighting starts. She's only here because Xerxes finds her amusing. You let it pass. You've heard worse, and you've survived worse. Instead, you focus on your crew. You walk the decks. You fix a torn sail with your own hands. You show the youngest sailor how to spot a shift in the current by watching the way the foam flicks sideways. You remind them not with words, but with presence that this fleet may belong to Xerxes, but these ships answer to you. Your captains trust you slowly, awkwardly, but they do. Because while other commanders throw feasts or speeches, you bring results. You intercept a rogue merchant vessel carrying stolen Greek armor. You adjust your patrols to avoid a reef others missed. You predict a storm 3 days before it hits and save 2 ships from splintering on the rocks. And while the great admirals argue over who gets to lead the left flank at Artameisia, you tighten your rigging and whisper to your helmsman. Let them go first. They'll remember that line later. And still you feel the weight of it. The looks. The quiet snubs. The way some men always turn their shoulders slightly when you pass as if to block your presence from history. But you know better. You know history doesn't ask permission. It watches, it listens, and then it remembers. You lie awake that night on a thin bedroll in your quarters, the sea lapping gently outside your open window. You trace the map of the Hellenic coast in your mind, marking choke points, potential ambushes, dangerous optimism. You try to sleep, but your thoughts are louder than the wind. Because the war is coming, and you already know that when it does, no one will remember what those men said about you. They'll only remember what you did. You wake to the smell of sea salt and roasted barley. Your ships are rocking gently in the harbor, tethered like restless animals, just waiting for someone to cut the ropes. And nearby, the Persian fleet is swelling like a storm cloud. More ships arrive daily, sleek curved hulls from Egypt, stout triremes from Phoenicia, glossy black-decked transports from Cilicia, each flying banners stitched with imperial confidence and just the faintest hint of chaos. You stretch, dress. Step onto the deck of your flagship like it's your second skin. And immediately you begin checking the lines. The oars. The readiness of men pretending not to be nervous. You listen for signs too much laughter. Too little movement sails not folded just right. Because the sea is about to decide who's bluffing. And you never bluff. Word spreads quickly. Xerxes has crossed the Hellespont. 2 bridges, one of boats, one of wood, laid over the churning waters as if to announce that even Poseidon takes orders now. It's hubris on a scale so massive even the gods probably took a step back and raised an eyebrow. Historians still argue whether the Persian king actually had the Hellespont whipped for breaking his bridge during a storm. You believe it. Xerxes isn't just waging war, he's auditioning for Olympus. You sail with the main fleet, 5 ships swallowed by the swarm. The sea is packed shoulder to shoulder with vessels that creak like anxious teeth, sails slapping in impatient rhythms. Each one carries weapons men and the dreams of an empire that believes it cannot lose. And somewhere in the middle of all that, your voice. You remain calm, collected. You speak only when necessary. You move only when you've decided the timing, not when the man next to you panics. You know most of them won't make it. Not because they're weak, but because they believe size always beats precision. They believe war is about noise. You believe otherwise. The journey into the Aegean is slow and bloated. Supply ships lag. Storms nibble at the flanks. A few captains crash on reefs. Morale dips. Food spoils. Maps prove more poetic than practical. You watch. You make notes. You reposition your own tiny squadron to ride just outside the dumbest decisions. And then you hit Artemisium. Narrow straits, rock-strewn shallows, currents that twist like snakes under silk. The perfect place for something terrible to happen. The Greeks are their smaller fleet, fewer ships, more anger. Their triremes cut the water like teeth, sharp and lean. They know this coast. They've mapped it with blood. You admire them. Briefly. Then you prepare to break them. The Persian admirals gather for another round of the let's debate strategy while ignoring the obvious game. You attend. You listen. You watch men with bad sandals and worse math insist on frontal assaults in narrow waters. You gently point out that some of the ships are too wide for that. They thank you with patronizing nods. So you adjust. You train your archers to fire sideways in quick bursts. You order your helmsmen to practice tight turns between markers at dusk. You switch from iron rams to reinforced bronze, heavier, riskier, but sharper. You give each of your captains a contingency plan and a quiet order. If the main line collapses, don't follow it down. When the battle begins, it's chaos. Screams, splinters. The sky full of javelins, the water blooming red in places you try not to look directly at. And your ships. They move like knives. You dart between larger vessels, cut their flanks, slip beneath their blind spots. You feint right ram left. You create gaps in their line, then leave just enough room for confusion to fester. You're not just fighting, you're conducting. The sea obeys. You watch one of your ships, a sleek, fast-built carrion cutter, slide under a Phoenician war galley, hook its rudder, and pull. The larger ship lists sideways. Your men swarm. You don't even need to give the order. They already know. It's over quickly. Not the battle, just the part where you prove you don't need to shout to lead. Later, after the Greeks retreat, under cover of night after the wounded have been pulled from the water, and the fires are tamped down with seawater and sand, someone asks how many ships you lost. None, you say, sipping water that tastes faintly of smoke. They blink. None. You nod. Someone else mutters not even a scratch on her hull. You shrug as if to say, we got lucky. But you didn't. You prepared. Word gets back to Xerxes. His scribes don't know whether to call you admiral or queen, or that unsettling woman who keeps winning. He settles for all three. Your 5 ships are now a symbol of precision discipline, and the uncomfortable truth that maybe, just maybe, a woman at sea isn't a novelty. She's a threat. The men still talk, still smirk. But now they watch you with something new in their eyes. Not doubt, caution. And you keep sailing forward, toward Thermopylae, toward Salamis, toward the moment the world will try to erase you and fail. Because while most people command ships, you command silence. And silence in war is always the last sound before the water explodes. You're no longer the curiosity. Not after Artemisium. Not after your 5 ships sailed through the chaos like dancers through broken glass. Not after captains twice your age started borrowing your tactics and calling them their own. Now you're something else a problem. To your enemies, to your peers, and to a few very specific admirals who can't stop wondering how they got outmaneuvered by someone who once wore pearls to a naval debriefing. Still, they won't say it to your face. Xerxes calls another war council. This one, bigger, louder, hotter tent, filled with bronze glint and opinionated men leaning over maps like they're roasting over coals. Everyone's eager to declare victory before the battle has even begun. Everyone wants to be the architect of conquest. No one wants to mention the Greeks are regrouping. You arrive late on purpose. Let them talk first. They go on about attacking Athens, about burning temples, about glory carved into the marble of history. Someone suggests storming the city through its port. Another counters with a full blockade. A third argues for total annihilation with such passion he almost knocks over the wine. You finally speak. Softly. So they have to quiet down just to hear you. Don't engage at Salamis. That's it, one sentence. Clear, reasoned, inevitable. You explain as calmly as if reciting a weather report the strait is too narrow. The Greek ships are smaller, faster, built for exactly this kind of terrain. If the Persian fleet enters, it will bottleneck. Chaos will win. Numbers will mean nothing. It's a trap. They want you there. You say it all while standing. Unflinching. With 5 victories behind you and a voice that doesn't rise even when the tension does. Historians still debate whether Xerxes ever truly listened to you. But there's a long pause in that tent. The kind of silence that prickles the skin and makes men glance at one another, wondering if maybe, just maybe, they're not the smartest person in the room. Then the noise returns. A noble from Sidon calls your concerns overcautious. A general laughs, tries to turn your warning into a joke about women being afraid of tight spaces. The room chuckles. Xerxes does not. He asks for opinions. You've already given yours. You step back. You say nothing more. They vote. They plan. They point ships at Salamis. And the trap is set. You walk out into the dawn air. The sun is rising too quickly, spilling light across the water like spilled wine. Your helmsman joins you. They didn't listen, he says. They heard me, you reply. It's not the same thing, but it's something. You prepare anyway. You recheck your hulls, reposition your crews, adjust your sails for sudden stops and sharper turns. You drill your archers until their fingers are raw. You practice retreat patterns knowing full well you may need them. You station your ships slightly behind the front lines. Not because you're afraid, because you're watching. The Persian fleet surges towards Salamis like a lion chasing a mouse through a keyhole. And the mouse. The Greeks are waiting, tucked into their home waters, perfectly placed, nimble, angry, desperate. Everything you said they would be. You stand on the deck of your flagship Sea Spray, flecking your robes, and watch as the inevitable unfolds. The front lines jam. The oars tangle. Bigger ships try to turn and can't. Archers fire into the backs of their own men. The Persians begin to panic. And the Greeks strike. From the flanks, from behind. From inside the very confusion Xerxes refused to see. It's brutal. The water churns with splinters and screams. Ships sink before they can even maneuver. The narrow strait becomes a battlefield and a grave all at once. Your 5 ships hold. You watch, you wait. And when a Phoenician vessel spins wildly toward you, its hull ablaze. Its captain clearly drunk on fear, you sidestep. Cleanly, efficiently. You slip past and let it crash behind you, dragging another Persian ship into the wreckage with it. You bark orders. Calm. Measured. Your helmsman already knows. You pivot. You dive into a gap. You don't chase glory, you survive it. Because unlike the others, you were never promised a monument. You were promised nothing. And somehow you made that enough. By dusk, the battle is lost. Xerxes, watching from a golden throne he had placed on a hill for a better view of his inevitable triumph, does not speak for a very long time. He finally asks who fought well. Your name comes up first. And here's the twist: you didn't win the battle. You didn't change its outcome. You didn't rewrite the tide. But you were right. And now everyone knows it. You've seen bad ideas before. You've seen hubris, laziness, arrogance, and silk robes. But what unfolds at Salamis is something else, a lesson served cold, hard, and salted by the Aegean. You were right. Completely, painfully, uncomfortably right. And now you're sailing through the aftermath. Charred timbers float by like blackened ribs. Helmets bob. A broken oar, a sandal, a splintered prow carved with some nobleman's name that now means nothing. The sea is eerily calm, as if exhausted by what it just witnessed. The Persian fleet is broken. What's left of it is drifting back toward Asia, licking its wounds, trying to pretend that this wasn't supposed to be the moment Greece fell on its knees. Your 5 ships still intact, still tight, still quiet. You instruct your captains to sail in a diamond formation. Defensive, subtle, not aggressive. You don't need to prove anything now. You've already done it. No speeches, no smirking. Just order, precision, calm. A few ships from other factions trail behind you. Their crews exhausted. Their pride rotted. One admiral who scoffed at you days ago now nods with a kind of grim respect that tastes more like regret. It's sunset when you dock and word travels fast. Xerxes is furious, but not at you. The story has already shifted. The woman admiral who warned him, who sailed smart, who rammed and retreated like a ghost on water, who didn't lose a single ship. The kind of story that circulates faster than truth. Historians still argue whether you saved your own life by sinking one of your own allies during the battle. They say you rammed a friendly vessel to trick the Greeks into thinking you were one of them. Xerxes, watching from his perch above, mistaking it for ruthless genius instead of betrayal? Maybe it was both. Only you know, and you don't explain. You return to camp like someone who's been on the edge and come back with teeth intact. Xerxes summons you. You're brought before him not as an outlier, but as an example. He praises you publicly, loudly, lavishly. Men have become women, he says, and women men. It's meant as the highest compliment a king like him can give. which says more about him than it does about you. You bow slightly, accept the gift he offers, a suit of gold-threaded armor too ornamental to ever see battle. You nod through the applause. You let it all wash over you like seawater you plan to dry off later. Because you know what this really is: survival. The men clap because they have to. The scribes scratch your name into scrolls because they've been told. The nobles sneer quietly. They don't like it, but they can't deny it. You were right. And now you're dangerous in a new way. No longer underestimated. Now resented. You return to your tent with the armor folded under your arm and your silence coiled tighter than a whip. Your helmsman asks what's next. You look toward the sea. The moon is rising and it feels like it's watching. We leave you say, now. You nod. Because you've seen enough. This war, this empire, it's all beginning to fray. Xerxes has lost faith in the navy. The land campaign falters. The Greeks rally, and worse, the confidence has cracked. You could stay. Wait. Collect more praise, more gold. More sideways glances from men who wish you would trip just once so they could say see. But you don't. You sail before sunrise. 5 ships. 5. Still enough. You pass through the straits in silence. No lights, no fanfare. Just the sound of wind through rigging and the slow, patient rhythm of oars against an indifferent sea. You leave behind wreckage, smoke, applause. A history that doesn't know whether to celebrate or erase you. And once again, you survive by not waiting for permission. You don't look back. There's no need. The Persian war machine will keep grinding forward for a while. But you've seen enough moving parts to know when something's losing momentum. And after Salamis, the wheels are slipping. So you sail east toward Halicarnassus through waters that used to whisper opportunity, but now just feel quiet. Not defeated, just quieter. Like the sea knows what happened and won't talk about it out loud. Your 5 ships cut the water like they never left. The men are tired but intact. The sails are patched but proud. Your helmsman watches the horizon with the patience of someone who now understands that fame can arrive in silence and depart the same way. There's no crowd waiting when you return. No trumpets, no festival. Just your city. Familiar, a little older. Maybe that's just you. You step back onto your dock sandals, pressing into wood you ordered, built with your own budgets years ago. The salt air smells sharper here, less ceremonial. You're home, and in your absence, nothing's collapsed. The city still breathes. Trade still flows. Your son, taller now, voice lower, greets you not with a hug, but with a full report and a question about tax grain. Perfect. Historians still debate how long you continued to rule after Salamis. Some say you stepped aside gracefully. Others say you held onto power longer than expected. There's no clear record, just fragments, letters, coins, the occasional bitter footnote in some retired admiral's memoirs. You don't correct any of it. You simply return to ruling. Quietly, effectively, like always. But you're different now. You've tasted the scale of empire, the absurdity of it, the way it moves like a giant golden statue balanced on sand. Beautiful from a distance, cracking underneath. You've stood in the court of Xerxes and realized that power, when it's too big, forgets how to think small, and that's where it starts to die. So you don't try to build bigger. You build better. You shore up your fleet, improve local defenses, rebuild the port warehouse that always creaked in the wind. You invest in the people who don't make noise but keep everything moving. Dock workers, scribes, midwives, grain counters. You become less visible. Not because you're hiding, because you're done performing. The other coastal rulers send you gifts. Congratulations, questions, invitations to form alliances you never asked for. You respond politely and with very little detail. Mystery becomes your shield now. You hear stories, of course. That you were rewarded by Xerxes with a statue somewhere in Susa. That you retired to a marble villa and wrote down your memoirs in secret code. That you never returned at all but sailed east into some mist-wrapped island where warrior queens live forever and drink fermented pomegranate juice while plotting from sea caves. You laugh. You still keep the armor he gave you ornate, absurd, unwearable. You hang it in your chamber where the sun hits it just before noon. A reminder, not of him, but of what you survived. You still patrol the docks at dawn sometimes. Old habits. The sailors nod when they see you like people do when a myth walks by, but also checks for mold in the grain barrels. You spend time with your son. He's growing into the kind of man the world might trust simply because he's male, But you don't let him coast on that. You make him work, learn. You quiz him on tides and treaties. You remind him that survival isn't about strength. It's about knowing when to speak and when to listen. He asked about the battle once. Just once. You tell him the truth. We were lucky. Then you add, and we were ready. Both are true. You leave out the part where you rammed an ally's ship to escape pursuit. That one stays yours. Over time, the war dies down. Persia shifts attention elsewhere. The Greeks argue with each other more than anyone else. The statues get taller, the memories get softer. But you remain. Not frozen in amber, not locked in legend. Just present. Alive. Unapologetically ordinary in a world that still hasn't figured out how to deal with that. And one day, because history loves symmetry, someone asks you to speak to a delegation of visiting naval envoys. You're older now, wiser, more amused than impressed. You smile, rise, walk slowly to the terrace where they're waiting. And as you greet them, the sea behind you glittering with just a hint of storm, you realize something unexpected. They're not looking past you anymore. They're listening. You walk the length of your harbor, and this time, no one whispers. There are no sideways glances, no half-muttered jokes about women and warfare, no admirals chuckling behind goblets of date wine. Just the sound of gull's rope creaking on moorings and a steady rhythm of respect that doesn't need to be spoken. It's odd at first. You've lived so long being the outlier, the asterisk in other people's sentences, that being acknowledged feels like walking into a room where someone has already pulled out a chair with your name on it. You don't sit, of course. You're not here to get comfortable. Instead, you watch, observe. Return to your old habits of quiet study. You read the wind again. Watch for shifts. Look at ships not just as tools of war, but as extensions of the city's voice, how it trades, how it learns, how it grows. And the Greeks. Oh, they haven't forgotten you either. You start hearing your name in their stories. Some get it right, most don't. You're the woman who fought like a man. The queen who outsailed the empire. The one who dared to speak truth to a king and survived. And the strangest part, they respect you. Not because they want to, but because they have to. Historians still argue whether the Greeks admired you or feared you. Some ancient writers call you wise. Others call you ruthless. One even accuses you of using unfeminine cleverness, which is a pretty poetic way of saying she made us nervous and we didn't like it. You never answer back. Because the more they argue over what you were, the more you become exactly what they feared, uncontrollable. Meanwhile, back in Halicarnassus, you commission new schools. Open the libraries wider. Hire foreign tutors for your son, not just to educate him, but to challenge him. You rewrite parts of your naval code, too. Quietly. Make it less about punishment, more about preparedness. Less about pride, more about precision. You turn your legacy into a blueprint. The years go on, and so do the stories. At first they stay tethered to facts, dates, battles, names. Then, slowly, they begin to float. One version has you defeating 6 ships with only 1. Another claims you foresaw the defeat at Salamis in a dream, and tried to warn the Persians by sending them a riddle. Then there's the one where you ride into battle with your long hair flying behind you, shouting the names of forgotten gods while lightning cracks the sky. It's flattering, mostly. You allow the myths to bloom, they won't hurt you now. You're too deeply rooted. Your name crosses borders. Travelers bring it to islands that had never heard of Korea. Poets recite your story in taverns and temples. A few even rename their daughters after you, though none quite know how to pronounce it the same way twice. You hear one of the newer versions on a windswept morning in the market. A boy is retelling the Battle of Salamis to a half-interested fishmonger. He says a great queen turned her ships into sea serpents and fooled an entire armada. He says she wore silver armor and spoke every language ever spoken. You don't interrupt. You just buy your fish and leave a coin slightly too generous. Later, you sit by the sea and wonder if that version is any less true than the one scratched into dusty scrolls by men who spent the entire battle watching from a hill. Truth, after all, is just what survives long enough to become legend. And your legend is just beginning to grow teeth. You've become a ghost that no one wants to admit is still alive. The Greeks keep talking. They always do. And now their tone shifts from reluctant admiration to outright obsession. Your name starts appearing in scrolls written by men who never met you, but claim to understand your every thought. You're painted in stories like a riddle wrapped in bronze. They say you fought like Achilles and advised like Athena. They say you ruled without emotion or with too much emotion. That you disguised yourself as a man or maybe as a goddess or maybe you didn't exist at all. You chuckle. Because there's a certain power in being misunderstood so thoroughly that no one can quite agree on how to erase you. You hear whispers of a new play being written in Athens. You're in it. Sort of. A veiled figure with a dagger sailing across moonlit waves, shaming kings with every turn of the rudder. The playwright has never been to Halicarnassus, of course, and likely wouldn't know port from starboard, but that doesn't matter. You've become a symbol, which ironically is harder to control than a fleet of warships. Historians still debate whether you courted this myth-making or simply endured it. But the truth is far simpler once you win a battle you weren't supposed to survive. The world stops asking who you are and starts asking what you represent. And in your case, you're a contradiction. You fought for the Persians but spoke like a Greek. You were loyal but also independent. You were a queen but commanded like a soldier. You were calm when men shouted, firm when they hesitated, and honest when they lied. You didn't just break the mold. You forgot there ever was one. And now every time another historian or dramatist or political rival or gossipy merchant tries to pin down the real you, they're left with too many versions, too many angles. Like trying to sculpt smoke. You start hearing of ships being named after you. Artameisia. Some spelled with an extra E just to make sure they're wrong. Others adorned with carved figureheads that look nothing like you ever did. Some depict you with long, wind-swept hair and a sword. Others show you seated calmly, a scroll in one hand, the sea at your back. All of them are flattering in their way, and none of them are accurate. But, again, that's not your concern. You didn't survive by asking for approval. You survived by knowing when to let the story carry the weight for you. Back in Halicarnassus, life continues in rhythms that ignore the noise beyond the harbor. You hold fewer counsels now. Your son has grown into his role steady-handed, sharp-eyed, less likely to bow than you once were. You let him rule more. Quietly, from a seat just behind the throne. And when he asks what you would do in a situation, tax dispute, trade, squabble minor, naval skirmish, you always begin with the same line. What do you see that no one else does? Because that really was always the trick. Not commanding louder, not fighting harder, seeing better. Seeing what's missing, what's flawed, what's about to collapse under the weight of its own assumptions. You pass your time walking the city. You talk to builders, midwives, bakers. You learn what's working, what isn't. You stop a famine not with ships, but with grain redistributed through a clever route you traced while slicing dried figs. People bow when they see you, but not out of fear, out of familiarity. You're not a ghost here. You're still real. But beyond Halicarnassus, the myth thickens. One poem claims you vanished into the sea sailing west until the horizon swallowed your sails. Another says you turned into a constellation forever watching over sailors. A third, more dramatic version insists you betrayed Xerxes and were executed in secret, your head tossed into the strait you once commanded. You hear all of them, and you wonder which one people will choose to remember. It doesn't matter, of course, because the truth is quieter, more patient. The truth is, this you lived. You ruled. You won battles and lost none. You advised kings and buried their mistakes. You led 5 ships into the jaws of an empire's ambition and steered every one of them home. You wake up one morning to a rumor. A new queen far away in a different time. A different city has taken your name. Artameisia. The scrolls say she rules in Korea 2 decades or maybe even a century after you. Or perhaps it's just confusion. The records are messy, overlapping, torn at the corners by time and ego. But there it is again, your name. You pause. Because it's not just flattery, it's legacy. Historians still argue whether this second Artameisia was named after you, or if she simply inherited the title through dynastic coincidence. Some scholars insist the name was reused as a tribute. Others think scribes just recycled it out of laziness. But for you, it doesn't matter. Because when someone borrows your name, what they're really borrowing is your story. And they never get it quite right. This new Artameisia is said to be a builder, a patron of art, a woman of marble and temples and grand funerary architecture. Some say she builds one of the 7 wonders of the world, a tomb so vast, so beautifully crafted it gives the word mausoleum to the ages. You smile at that. A tomb so unforgettable it becomes the standard for remembering the dead. Not bad for someone they said would never leave a trace. Of course people start confusing you too. Your battle at Salamis gets lumped into her reign. Her love of sculpture gets retrofitted into your biography. The lines blur. The timelines cross. You start to disappear into someone else's accomplishments. And still you say nothing. Because you know how this works. History isn't carved in stone. It's drawn in wet sand. And if someone else walks through the same path later, their footprints overwrite yours. Not to erase, but to echo. Some later poets claim there was only one Artameisia, and that you lived for generations defying time, marrying war and wisdom, until even the gods grew bored of trying to contain you. You like that version, it's the least accurate, and therefore the most true. You wonder about this second woman. If she too stared down councils of men who couldn't pronounce her title without flinching. If she fought her own wars not with ships but with city plans and construction budgets. If she understood as you did that permanence isn't in power, it's in memory. And memory? That's a slippery thing. You're walking through the market again, your sandals soft on worn stones. Your veil drawn loosely to keep the sun off your face, and you hear your name. Spoken by two women selling fabric. One says it with reverence, the other with hesitation. Which one do you mean, one asks? You pause, listen. The one who built the tomb. No, says the other. The one who survived the war. You smile to yourself. Because maybe it's not confusion after all. Maybe it's fusion. Maybe across time the stories stack. The women multiply, the victories compound. Maybe you're no longer just a woman, maybe you're a shape. A shadow. A name that opens doors and raises eyebrows. You become the question people ask when history says no. You return home to find a package on your table. A scroll from Alexandria? A copy of a military treatise? A footnote mentions you, misquotes you naturally, says you were the only woman among the admirals and the only one who did not fail. It's a compliment dressed as an exception. You correct the margin with your pen. There were others. I was just harder to ignore. You don't send it back. You don't need to. Because you're no longer trying to shape your story. You're just watching how far it travels. The years pass, quieter now. No battles, no councils. No gold-plated gifts from kings trying to buy your loyalty with flattery and silk. And yet you're still here. Still watching, still listening. You walk through the gardens in the late afternoons, trailing your fingers along the rosemary hedges, feeling the stone warm from sunlight and memory. The wind off the harbor smells the same as it always has. Salt. Sand. A hint of something distant. But the people have changed. The merchants have different accents. The soldiers wear slightly different armor. The scribes, younger and thinner, carry copies of your old naval records as though they were sacred scrolls. They quote you sometimes with reverence, sometimes with the kind of smug detachment that only comes from someone who has never needed to command 5 ships through a storm of arrows. You hear one quote repeated so often it starts to sound like prophecy. To survive is not to yield. It is to steer. Did you say that maybe? Or maybe you whispered something similar on a cold morning off the coast and someone remembered it just well enough to misquote it centuries later. You're not offended. You're impressed. That's how you know it stuck. Historians still argue whether you ever wrote anything down. No diary survives, no official memoir, just fragments, citations. Gossip preserved like pressed flowers between the pages of other men's stories. You once thought about writing it all your version, the real version. But then you realized you'd already done it. Not in ink, but in action. And the rest, that's for others to attempt misunderstand and pass along at half volume. Your son rules now. Not perfectly, but well enough. He has your steadiness, if not your subtlety. When he fumbles, he comes to you, quietly, at night, under lantern light and excuses about needing advice for a friend. You pretend to believe him. You teach him the way you always have through questions, not lectures. What would have happened if Xerxes had listened? What could 5 ships do today if commanded right? What's louder, a war cry or silence? He answers as best he can. You nod even when he's wrong. He'll learn. You start spending more time in the archives, reading old war logs, letters from distant ports, edicts with seals that crumble at the corners. You see your name appear in documents that get the dates wrong, but the sentiment right. And occasionally you catch one that calls you a legend. It's strange being called that while still alive. It's even stranger when you realize you've become your own ancestor. One afternoon, a group of young scholars from Rhodes arrives at your court. They're studying naval tactics, writing a treatise. They want to ask you questions. You agree. They sit in a semicircle like acolytes. One clears his throat and asks what it felt like to command during Salamis. You pause. Not for dramatic effect. You just haven't been asked that in a long time. You tell them this. It felt like steering a ship through fog while someone read you poetry in the wrong language and behind you the sea caught fire. They blink. One scribbles furiously. Another asks what made you different from the other commanders. You answer without hesitation, I didn't need to be liked. That one they write down twice. You give them tea. Let them wander the docks. You walk them to their ship before they leave and tell the youngest one to triple check his hull ropes. He blushes and forgets, of course. The ship has to turn back an hour later. You don't say I told you so. You just smile and return to your garden. The days stretch. The waves slow. But you don't fade. You diminish with style. And each time someone else says your name, you let it ring like a bell. A little distorted, but unmistakably yours. You stop appearing in records around the time most people start expecting statues. No scandal, no dramatic fall from power, just less. Fewer scrolls, fewer mentions. Your name drifts out of the court documents and into quieter places, lineages, merchant logs, whispered anecdotes passed around like heirloom spices. And that's fine by you, because monuments are for the insecure. You've never needed marble to remember who you are. Instead, your legacy travels by mouth spoken low in barracks, taught in quiet corners of coastal academies muttered by captains, trying to explain to green sailors how a commander should think. You become a cautionary tale to men who rely too much on size and not enough on sense. You become a promise to women who've been told to wait their turn. You become an answer to the question, has it ever been done before? And quietly that answer begins to shape decisions you'll never see. You live out your final years by the water. The sea that once roared now laps gently at your ankles when you walk the beach in the morning. You know every rock, every smell, every change in the wind. It speaks to you like an old friend, no longer testing you, just reminding you it's still there. One day you wake to a strange sound. Voices. High-pitched, fast, excited. You walk to the harbor and find a group of girls racing barefoot across the docks, reenacting the Battle of Salamis with sticks and chalk lines. One shouts, I'm Artameisia, and climbs a crate like it's a ship. Another yells, No, I am, and waves a broken reed like a war banner. They argue, giggle, reenact a naval ramming maneuver with a wheelbarrow, and collapse in laughter. You watch from a distance, unseen. And something inside you loosens, warms. They don't know every detail. They don't pronounce your name the same way. But they chose it. Historians still argue whether your story was passed down by loyal scribes or stitched together from rumor and legend. But you know better. Stories like yours don't survive by being written once. They survive by being told again. Later, as you sit in your favorite chair, wood worn smooth by years sea breeze drifting in, you realize you don't mind the fading. It's not erasure. It's transformation. A name becomes a symbol. A symbol becomes a myth. And a myth that lives longer than any stone. You remember something you told your son years ago when he asked if you were afraid of being forgotten. You said, if I vanish, I'll vanish forward, into other people's mouths. He didn't understand then. He does now. Because one morning you wake before dawn. Your son is at your side. He's grown calm, capable. The city hums beyond your window. You turn to him and say only you're ready. He nods, doesn't try to protest. He knows. And just like that, you step back. Not because you're weaker, not because they finally made room for someone else, but because it's time. You walk the garden one more time. Trace the carved lines on your old maps. Stand at the docks and watch 5 ships in the distance, sleek, fast, strong, carving the water like memory. Then you return home, and close the door softly behind you. You're not mentioned again for a very long time. Not in royal decrees. Not in temple inscriptions. Not in the carefully curated chronicles where emperors make themselves immortal by listing their victories and conveniently omitting their defeats. And yet you remain, not as a line in a scroll, but as a shadow beneath decisions. You're the unspoken example, the strategy no one takes credit for. The reason some captains pause before launching a frontal assault and ask, what would Artameisia have done? You exist in that pause, and there you thrive. Centuries pass. The world shifts. Empires rise, fall, change names, change gods. The Persians lose their grip. The Greeks fracture, the Romans come storming through like it's a personality contest and they have to win. Temples fall, seas change course, Halicarnassus becomes Bodrum. And still your name lingers, carved lightly in footnotes, scribbled in the margins of old naval handbooks. used by historians who need a narrative twist, and then unexpectedly, a woman. You can practically hear the surprise in their voices even from the grave. Some medieval monk centuries later finds a copy of Herodotus and underlines your name 3 times. He doesn't know what to make of you, so he calls you a mystery, a curious deviation, but he keeps reading. And that's the point. Historians still argue whether Herodotus admired you or feared you. His words teeter between reverence and discomfort. He calls you bold, brilliant, dangerous, then questions your methods, then quotes you with awe. It's almost sweet. They say he was from Halicarnassus, too. Maybe he heard your story growing up. Maybe you passed each other in the market once and he remembered your face. Or maybe he just liked writing about people who broke the mold without asking first. Whatever the truth, his pages carry your shadow forward. Eventually, a school of thought forms around you. Naval theorists revisit your tactics. Feminist historians in the 19th century rediscover your name and light it like a torch. They write essays, speeches, angry pamphlets. Then something changes. Suddenly you're not just a story. You're a symbol. You appear in textbooks, novels, historical dramas with questionable wigs. Painters try to capture your likeness despite not knowing what you looked like. Some get close, most don't. You're either portrayed as a goddess, a villain, or a woman too beautiful to be taken seriously holding a sword that looks suspiciously unused. But you let them try. Because each attempt, each portrayal, each clumsy homage proves something simple and quiet. You're still here. You become a question teachers ask in classrooms. Can anyone name a female commander from ancient history? And someone somewhere will say, Artameisia. Maybe they pronounce it wrong. Maybe they don't know the whole story. But they say it. And that, after all, is how the tide rolls forward. Not in waves, in ripples. You don't have descendants who rule empires. You don't have shrines. You don't even have a confirmed burial site. But you have that. A name whispered, repeated, reshaped, held up by strangers. Like a sail still catching wind long after the ship has vanished from sight. Your name has become a tide. It rolls in, disappears, rolls in again. Not loud, not crashing, just persistent. And as the centuries wash over what you did with 5 ships and 1 quiet voice, you remain not as a headline in history, but as a current beneath it. A few scholars keep digging. They find inconsistencies, misattributions. Someone in a dusty room in Oxford insists you never existed at all. Another in Cairo finds a single coin stamped with a strange sea creature crest and says, this could be her. They're both wrong, and a little bit right. Because by now your story isn't in the records. It's in the retelling, the oral drift, the interpretations. You've become a narrative that refuses to sit still, which is fitting for a sailor. One day, many empires later, a poet writes a new version of Salamis. In it, you don't just advise Xerxes, you command the entire fleet. You see the trap and spring it in reverse, leading the Greeks in circles until they turn on each other. It's complete fiction, and somehow it feels closer to the truth. You fade not in failure, not in disgrace, but in the way wind fades after a storm. The kind of ending that leaves no trace on the surface but stirs something deep underneath. And what remains? Not a statue. Not a crown. Not even a clear timeline. What remains is that you acted in a world that expected you to wait. You led when others wanted you silent. You spoke truth not because it would be heard, but because it needed to be said. You sailed straight into the machinery of empire not to dismantle it, but to prove you could survive its weight. And you did. With 5 ships. With foresight instead of firepower. With a voice that didn't need to be raised to be remembered. Historians still argue whether you changed the course of the war. But they never argue about this. You were there, and you didn't flinch. Wind down 300 words. And now the tide goes out. The battle fades, the sails lower, the noise quiets to nothing but the slow hush of water against wood. The sea, as always, forgets nothing but speaks in softer tones now. You step away from the harbor. The sun has dipped. The sky glows like old parchment scribbled faintly with the last stars. Your story, yes, yours no longer needs to shout. It hums, like a lullaby carried across centuries. The name Artameisia still floats on the air. Sometimes mispronounced, sometimes embellished, but never lost, never quite gone. And somewhere, maybe in a classroom, maybe in a quiet room, lit by a single candle, someone is hearing about you for the first time. They imagine a queen in bronze, or in silk, or in silence. They picture 5 ships holding a line against the storm. They wonder what you saw that no one else did. They ask, did she win? And the answer, warm, steady, inevitable, is she survived. So let the maps roll back up. Let the sea reclaim its stillness. Let your mind slow like oars lifting gently from the water after a long, steady journey. You're safe now. You've reached the shore. And if anyone ever doubts what one voice 5 ships and a little clarity can do, tell them to listen, not for thunder, but for the ripple. Good night, sailor.